I walked out of the post office line holding a pastel envelope that branded my aunt's mailbox as a violation. Karen and the HOA fined her $100 and scoffed at her pride by posting the notice on the board. So I brought the county plat under the courthouse lights, and within days the judge's order seized their clubhouse, locking away the very doors they guarded. And that turn, well, it cost them more than a fine. I stood there stunned. We were raised to believe a mailbox was a simple thing, a handshake with the postal service. But in the HOA's eyes, it was now a battlefield. At the row of mailboxes, the wind sighed through brittle grass. The pastel notice fluttered in my aunt's hand. Each box in that line told a story: the Petersons with their gleaming black lacquer, the Millers with brass trim. My aunt's weather-gray cedar still solid, though a little sun-worn. She touched her box the way people touch a family Bible, gently, reverently. "Do they think this box isn't good enough?" she whispered. I didn't answer right away. The silence pressed down heavy as the winter sky. It was a moment of humiliation that didn't need words. At the post office that afternoon, I carried the notice to the counter. The clerk, an older man with a beard yellowed by years of coffee, raised an eyebrow. "Looks like your HOA's got its own spec book. USPS doesn't regulate paint colors." He slid across a small card stamped with the postal seal. Mailbox standards, height, distance, placement. No mention of pastel pallets or cedar posts. That card felt like more than cardboard. It felt like proof. We took the card to the diner on Main Street, the one with booths patched in duct tape and a pie carousel that hadn't turned since 1998. Over corned beef hash, I laid the card next to the notice. "See," I told her, "this is the real standard, not their chart." My aunt sipped her coffee slowly. The room smelled of bacon grease and maple syrup. Across the way, a neighbor glanced at us, eyes flicking toward the pastel slip. In small towns, gossip travels faster than church bells. "Maybe I should just pay it," she murmured. That stung. Not because of the money, it was the principle. I set the notice flat against the table, smoothing its creases. "Aunt May, this isn't about a mailbox. It's about them telling you what's yours isn't yours." Her eyes met mine. There was fatigue there, but also a spark I remembered from when she fought to keep the old oak from being cut down for parking. "What would you do?" she asked. "Me?" I smiled thinly. "I'd audit their rules line by line. The mini-cliff sat right there between us. Pay quietly and let it die, or dig in and start something that might not end quietly." That evening I walked back to the row of mailboxes. The wind still stirred, carrying the smell of damp leaves. I touched the cedar post myself. It was steady, the grain silvered, but firm. "Small fines hide big habits," I muttered. The line stuck with me. HOA fines weren't about dollars, they were about training obedience. Today, it was $100 for paint. Tomorrow, it might be $500 for a garden gnome, or worse, a lien for a shed that sat 2 feet too close to the easement. As I stood there, a neighbor drove past, slowing just enough to look. I wondered which side they would choose if this became public. In subdivisions, people pick sides like weather forecasts. They follow whichever suits their mood. Inside the kitchen, the pastel notice lay pinned by a salt shaker, the postal card beside it. Proof against accusation. I poured a glass of water and listened to the quiet creak of the house. My aunt sat in her chair staring at the folded fine jaw tight. "They think they can shame me," she said finally. "Pink paper, like I'm a child." "Shame only works if you accept it," I told her. The silent beat returned in the hush between us, the fridge, hum, the tick of the clock, the faint shuffle of branches against the roof. It was the sound of decision being made, wordless and slow. Finally, she folded the notice carefully and slid it back into the envelope. "We'll fight." That was the cliffhanger I'd been waiting for. Not a shouted rebellion, but a choice sealed in quiet resolve. A decision, cliff sharp as any gavel strike. The email subject line was short like a gavel strike, non-compliant post. It landed in my inbox at 9:12 a.m., the same way a pastel notice had landed on my aunt's table last week. "Anything important?" Aunt May asked, rinsing her cup. "Apparently, our cedar mailbox is a criminal," I said. The message carried the tone of authority but the teeth of a catalog. It listed bullet points, linked a glossy vendor guide, and warned of additional fines if not corrected within 10 days. I scrolled, looking for covenant citations for a bylaw number for anything that smelled like law. All I found were marketing phrases: sandstone, whisper, granite, frost. Paint colors, not ordinances. Do they even cite the covenants, she asked. I shook my head. They cite landscaping brochures. At the USPS White Deer counter, the fluorescent ballast buzzed like a tired bee. The clerk, with his yellowed mustache and slow drawl, looked over the notice I brought. Mailbox, height 41 to 45 inches from road surface. Distance 6 to 8 inches from curb. Door faces the street. He tapped a laminated card that looked older than both of us. That's it. USPS doesn't regulate paint. Can I get that in print, I asked. He fed paper through the cranky printer. The sheet rolled out with the black USPS seal, clear as a sheriff's badge. When we stepped into the sunlight, I held it over my phone screen where the HOA email still glowed. 1 page of a law stacked on 1 page of preference. Paper walks louder than voices, I said. Aunt May folded her arms. Then let's walk it over to theirs. We carried the papers into the diner, the one with duct-taped booths and pie slices under glass. The waitress topped off our mugs without asking. The table smelled like maple syrup and old bacon grease. I laid the vendor PDF, the HOA email, and the fresh USPS sheet side by side. The contrast was almost funny pastel graphics against government fonts. "What's next?" Aunt May asked. "County plat," I said. "If they can't win on paint, they'll fight on property line." At the Carson County Clerk's office, a map unrolled across the counter with a gentle snap. Blue ink lines, parcel numbers, the embossed seal pressed like a coin into the margin. The clerk traced with a ruler. Road easement ends here. Mailbox sits here. Inside your frontage within spec. He dated, initialed, and slid the copy back. We walked out into the parking lot where the sodium vapor light hummed even in daylight, turning everything weak tea yellow. Neither of us spoke. The silence felt like a church pause. Then came the whir. A small drone dipped low over the lot, gimbal twitching. It slid toward the subdivision camera, angled like an unblinking eye. "Is that theirs?" Aunt May asked. "Somebody's," I said, making a note on my phone. Time-stamped quiet. Back home, I drafted a reply to the HOA. "Thank you for your notice. Attached are USPS placement standards and the stamped county plat confirming compliance. Please cite the covenant clause controlling mailbox paint. Attachments stacked neatly, USPS sheet, county plat." Their response was immediate, another link to the vendor guide. This time, highlighted sections about aesthetic alignment. Still, no covenant, no bylaw, just marketing fluff. I typed slower. "Vendor materials are not binding authority. Please provide the recorded covenant and bylaw controlling mailbox paint." Then, for politeness added, "We share the goal of a tidy neighborhood. USPS and county requirements come first as law requires." Aunt May read over my shoulder. "That's sweet enough," she said. "Salted, but sweet." Later at Cattleman's Diner, our neighbor Hannah slid into the booth uninvited. "Y'all are trending," she said. Karen posted a chart of approved finishes. "Watermark says Bright Leaf Landscaping." "That's the vendor," I said. Half the board's quoting it like scripture, she said. Other halves grumbling about vendor kickbacks. Aunt May stirred her coffee. "Creative accounting isn't compliance." I laid the plat copy between us. "Lines aren't creative, they're measured." My phone buzzed with another email inspection scheduled this week. Attached was a checklist with the vendor's logo, not the HOA's. "They're building a case," Hannah said. "Let them build," I said. "We'll bring the foundation." That night we walked to the mailbox row again. I measured with a tape 42 inches high, 7 from the curb. I logged each number like vital signs. "Drone again?" Aunt May asked, pointing to a light flicker above the trees. "Yeah," I said. "And now it's logged." We passed the bulletin board by the clubhouse. Lost dogs, bake sale flyers, and a fresh notice community branding initiative. At the bottom, a URL leading back to the same vendor guide. I snapped a photo, my finger pointing to the watermark. At the kitchen table, I laid out our evidence like cards, USPS sheet, county plat, with seal HOA email. Pastel notice vendor flyer. A circle of paper closing in on itself. "Are we making too much of this?" Aunt May asked. "No," I said. "We're making it accurate." She leaned back, exhaled. "I don't like being gossip." "You're not," I said. "The process is." I drafted one more email. "For tomorrow's site review, please bring the covenant clause controlling paint. We'll have our documents ready. CCD the county clerk. Sunlight disinfects." Just as I hit send, a new message popped up, not from the HOA but the county council's office. Subject: Mailbox placement. See log. The body was one-sentence camera audit from last month shows activity at 03:15 near your frontage. Clip available tomorrow. I read it twice. Aunt May's face drained, then steadied. "What does it mean?" she asked. "It means someone's camera already caught something I said, and tomorrow we'll see it." Outside, the sodium vapor lamp buzzed steady, the sound of proof waiting in silence. Miguel showed up at the White Deer Diner with a manila folder so fat it wouldn't close. He set it down like a farmer drops seed, deliberate, heavy, hopeful. "Receipts," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. His voice carried the kind of patience that comes from decades in county records. Receipts for what I asked. For everything they forgot you'd notice. Repairs billed twice landscaping hours that don't match. And maps wait until you see the maps. The waitress poured us coffee and left us to it. The morning air smelled of bacon-damp coats and paper ink. Miguel flipped open the folder. The top sheet was a USPS compliance letter confirming that Aunt May's mailbox was within federal standards. The next was a county overlay plat lines crisp in blue, the HOA's sketch drifting several feet into her lot like a sloppy photocopy. "Overlay them," he said. I laid the translucent copy on top of the county plat. The drift was obvious. Their approved map swallowed land that wasn't theirs. Miguel leaned back, arms crossed. "See, a story told twice will start to wobble." At the hardware store aisle that afternoon, I picked up new reflective stickers for the mailbox. The old layers had weathered into a stack. Year over year, the HOA demanded changes, and May complied just enough to keep peace. Now the stickers peeled like a geological record of compliance. Prop what one was stressed, not broken, but scarred. As I held the packet, I thought of the folder. Receipts, letters, overlays, Miguel's quiet arsenal. That night we sat on Aunt May's porch. The air smelled of wet cedar. Across the street, an infrared security light hummed faint but steady, tinting the quiet with a low frequency. "Why's Miguel helping us?" she asked. "He worked on the county planning board," I said. "He's seen them stretch maps before, and now he wants to see them stretch and snap." The silence pressed in again, softer this time, like a hand on your shoulder. Miguel came back 2 days later, early breakfast. He ordered black coffee, scrambled eggs, nothing fancy. He reached into his jacket and slid a thumb drive across the table. "What's this?" I asked. "First clip," he said. "Neighbor's camera time-stamped 03:15. You'll want to watch." I turned it over in my palm. The drive was warm, like it had just been pulled from a computer. "Why now?" I asked. "Because silence is where proof grows," he said. "But silence needs timing. You've got theirs." We didn't open it right there. Some things aren't meant for a public booth. Instead, we walked the hardware store aisle again, looking at bolts and weatherproof paint like ordinary men. Miguel kept talking low a tone only I could hear. "They think fines are compliance. Fines are intimidation," he said. "You've been here before I asked." He nodded. "Different board, same tricks. They use maps, the way card sharks use decks, shuffle enough nobody remembers what was on top." I slipped the drive into my pocket. It felt heavier than it should. That evening, back at the porch, Aunt May joined me. The hum of the infrared lamp washed over us. I set the thumb drive on the table like a totem. "What's on it?" she asked. Proof, I said. She folded her arms. Proof scares them more than money. We sat quiet the night, thick with crickets and the occasional engine from the highway. I could almost hear the clip inside the drive waiting. I plugged it in at my desk after she went to bed. The folder contained stills frames from a surveillance camera. Each carried the county timestamp, clean font, white letters. One by one, the images revealed a shadowed figure near the mailbox at 03:15. Not vandalism exactly, more like tampering. A hand measuring a posture, writing something down. I clicked through slowly, frame by frame. My chest tightened. This wasn't random curiosity. This was documentation staged against us. The next morning, Miguel met me again at the diner. I slid the laptop across, let him click through the stills. "They'll argue video's blurry," he said. "But records will outlast clips." His words carried the weight of experience, the tone of a man who'd watched arguments win or lose on the presence of a seal, a signature, a receipt. I nodded. "So, we keep stacking paper." "Exactly," he said. The viral line sat in my notebook. "Silence is where proof grows." I underlined it twice. At exactly 03:15, the camera caught it, a figure at the cedar post bent in the dark, tagging notes onto a clipboard. The frame was grainy, but undeniable. A shadow leaned over Aunt May's mailbox like a surveyor without permission. When I froze the still on my laptop, the digital clock in the corner glowed 03:15. The truth had a timestamp now. The county inspector agreed to review it. He was a patient man, polite to the point of ritual. We met at the courthouse, the air thick with the smell of burned coffee from the kiosk in the lobby. He set his tablet down, eyes narrowing as he clicked through the images. "They marked it," he asked. Measured, wrote something I said, then left. He nodded slowly. "That isn't random. That's an assessment without authority." He jotted notes, his pen squeaking faint against the clipboard. "Mailbox height 42. Placement 7 inches. Standard. USPS confirms. County plat confirms. HOA not binding on federal hardware." His calmness was like ballast grounding me in a storm of pastel notices. Back in the subdivision, dawn edged the cul-de-sac. Sprinklers hissed water-tapping rhythm on driveways. The cedar post stood as it had for years, gray solid, weathered but straight. Aunt May touched it with a steady hand. "Funny," she said. "They call this non-compliant." I looked at the stickers stacked like rings on a tree. "Credibility snaps before wood." She smiled, faintly a crack in the tension. That afternoon, the inspector sent an email. Subject line compliance confirmed. The body was 3 words long. "Mailbox is compliant." Attached was his note signed, dated, sealed. When Aunt May read it, her shoulders dropped for the first time in weeks. "That's it?" she asked. "It's not the end," I said, "but it's a page that won't burn." The paper carried weight that drones and pastel slips could not erase. Later, I replayed the clip at the diner screen, balanced between coffee cups. Miguel leaned over, eyes scanning the blurry figure in the glow of the timestamp. "They'll argue it's vague," he said. "But the inspector's letter makes it real." I nodded. Paper always wins. We let the clip roll again. The silent beat of that frozen frame sat heavy, the figure hunched the mailbox, standing the timestamp glowing. A picture of arrogance meeting patience. Neighbors started to notice. At the bulletin board near the clubhouse, someone had pinned a photocopy of the compliance note. Beneath it in pen, a scrawl. "So why the fines?" The question hung there like laundry in public, unavoidable. That night, back on this porch, Aunt May rocked slowly. The infrared lamp hummed again, steady as ever. She stared at the cedar post barely visible in the moonlight. "Truth is patient," she said softly. Then she turned to me. "Can they be—" The words weren't defiance, but a cliffhanger of their own, an emotional pause that promised the fight was far from over. They fined my aunt $100 over a mailbox, then dimmed the community hall lights and projected a map that bent our lot like warm taffy. The projector hummed. A blue outline drifted across the screen. Our frontage mysteriously thinner, the right-of-way fatter. It wasn't a survey, it was a wish. Karen stood near the podium with her laminate and her smile. For clarity, she said, tapping the slide. The community easement includes the approach to these mailboxes, therefore, aesthetic alignment applies. I held my breath, then raised the stamped plat so the seal caught the light. For clarity, I said. The county disagrees. The room smelled like casserole from the potluck table in back, green beans, cheddar fried onions, and the nervous sugar of grocery cookies. Folding chairs creaked. Phones glowed. On the wall behind Karen, a bulletin board sagged under petition sheets, tear-off tabs fluttering like fringe. Vote of no confidence had 3 columns of signatures already. Mr. Carter Karen said sweetly, "The board has thoroughly reviewed the vendor's guide." "Vendors sell," I said. "Counties measure." Hannah, 2 rows back, stood with a stack of photocopies. Copies of the plat and the USPS spec if anyone wants the boring book. Papers shuffled down the rows like hymnals. Miguel leaned against the side wall, arms crossed, letting the scene breathe. I felt him there without looking quiet ballast. Karen clicked to a second slide, a warped map with the HOA logo watermark. "This overlay better represents community use," she said. "Use isn't ownership," I answered. "And use doesn't amend metes and bounds." A retired teacher near the aisle raised a hand. "Which one of these has a seal?" I lifted the plat again. The county emboss glowed like a coin. I didn't have to say anything. The projector flickered. For a heartbeat, the image froze a jagged lot line pretending to be law. The room fell into a silent beat, the hush before a choir starts. I heard the ceiling fan tap its loose pull chain. I heard someone's spoon settle in styrofoam. Karen cleared her throat. "We're not here to quibble." "That's exactly why we're here," I said, gentler than it sounded. I set the stamped plat on the table and slid forward 1 page, the inspector's note from yesterday. "Mailbox is compliant." A murmur rolled the room. Thomas, the board's lawyerly conscience, adjusted his glasses. "Madam President, if the mailbox meets federal placement and the county recognizes the frontage as shown, what is the basis for a fine?" Karen smiled tighter. "Community standards." Miguel's voice carried from the side wall without moving above conversational volume. "Community standards live under covenants, not vendor PDFs." Karen's gavel touched wood. "Point of order. Point of fact," I said. "Law isn't loud, it's lasting." That line didn't explode, it settled. People turned it over like a smooth stone. A man in a ball cap stood. Then, why my fine last month for a bird feeder, Karen didn't answer. Another chair scraped. Why did the mailbox colors change twice in a year? No answer. Hannah lifted a petition sheet. "If the map's wrong, and the fine's wrong, then the money is wrong." She looked at me, then at the board table. "Refund." The word didn't catch immediately. It landed, rolled, and bumped into a dozen feet. Then a woman near the door repeated it, tentative. "Refund." From the back. "Refund." Closer to refund. Then the whole room. "Refund." The chant wasn't angry. It was rhythm. It filled the seams of the hall, echoed in the metal folding chairs, shook the petition tabs on the bulletin board. Karen rapped the gavel once, twice. The sound got swallowed. Thomas leaned to her mic. "We can't authorize refunds this second, but we can move to suspend further fines pending audit." He looked at the audience. "Motion, second," Miguel said, still from the wall. "Discussion," Thomas asked. An older neighbor stood. "I paid $50 for a hose bib cover last winter. If the bylaws don't say colors, where'd that come from?" Karen steadied her smile with both hands on the podium. "We will address refunds after council. Council already spoke." Someone called. Laughter, quick and grateful. I stepped to the projector cart and held up the warped map printout beside the stamped plat. "These 2 don't match. Only one is recorded. Only one binds." A silence fell again, thinner this time, like ice ready to crack. You could hear the coffee urn click to warm. You could smell the casserole cooling. Outside the windows, a dusk line stretched across the cul-de-sac, sprinklers ticking at the edges. Refund. The crowd breathed again, softer, as if trying the word in their mouths. Karen changed tactics. Allegations of map mistakes are defamatory, she said. The board will pursue appropriate remedies. Miguel's eyebrows climbed subtle as a shrug. I answered before he had to. You're welcome to pursue whatever you like. Just bring the recorded documents with you. Point of order, Thomas said again, voice firmer. We will suspend any further mailbox fines until this is resolved. He looked down the table. A vote. Hands went up hesitant, then steady. Karen didn't raise hers. The motion passed. It didn't fix anything not yet, but the air shifted. People exhaled. A kid near the back asked if the brownies were free. A neighbor wiped at her eyes with the end of a sleeve, pretending it was allergies. Karen clicked to the first slide again, the warped outline stubborn and incorrect. This remains the board's understanding of the easement, she said. Her gavel kissed the block. And we will defend it. Hannah whispered at my shoulder. She won't give an inch. She shouldn't, I said, surprising myself. She should give the map. Phones rose little monuments to memory. The projector fan whined. Somewhere behind the stage divider, a metal door rattled in a small gust, the hall's breath catching. Thomas tried one last bridge. Madam President, at minimum, we should remove the recent fines tied to this map until the county Karen cut him off with a crisp rap. No. She faced the room, chin set. This board has acted within its authority. If you persist in these accusations, we'll seek relief in court. It was the decision Cliff I had expected, but still it lifted the floor. We'll sue, she said, the gavel landing harder this time. We'll sue. The chant died on the edge of that sentence. The room didn't boo. It didn't break. It did something quieter. It remembered. Petition sheets rustled. The seal on the plat shone. Someone whispered near the aisle, almost tender. Lasting, not loud. The lights came up too bright. People blinked and gathered their coats. The casserole steam had faded to a fondness on the air. I slipped the stamped plat into my folder, felt the raised circle under my thumb, and thought of the next room where a different seal might speak. Miguel passed by without stopping. Bring your calm, he said under his breath. They'll bring their volume. I'll bring the seal, I said. He smiled. Exactly. Outside, the evening cooled. The petition tabs ticked in the breeze. Karen's gavel echoes chased us into the parking lot, thin, insistent, already aging. The judge's voice was steady, every syllable, careful. The fine is voided. Further enforcement regarding the mailbox is enjoined pending audit. It wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate. The kind of voice that doesn't need volume. Aunt May let out a breath so faint it barely moved her shoulders. Miguel bowed his head as if in prayer. Across the aisle, Karen stood stiff-chin, raised a statue of defiance. The clerk stamped the docket. That sound was louder than the gavel. Paper had weight now. In the courthouse hall, the echo of shoes met the hiss of burnt coffee from the kiosk. The deputy appeared from the elevator metal keyring and his hand tags labeled in black marker. He carried also a thick envelope with the raised county seal. Sheriff's office, he said evenly. We'll need to serve the injunction today. Karen's lawyer stepped forward. Is that necessary? The deputy raised the envelope. The order says it is. Miguel smiled without humor. That's the sound of accountability. We followed him down the courthouse steps. Sunlight caught the seal through the paper, making it glow like stained glass. In the cruiser lot, the deputy opened the back door, slid the envelope into a hard binder. The keys rattled when he shut it. Clubhouse next, I asked. Clubhouse, he said. The ride over felt like a procession. By the time we arrived, neighbors had gathered. Some leaned against cars, others clustered by the BBQ pavilion where smoke curled up from a fundraiser pit. The smell of sauce drifted across the parking lot. The deputy unfolded the order and read it again, this time under open sky. Temporary injunction. Suspension of fines. Preservation of records. Access to Clubhouse required. He held out his hand. Karen didn't move. The air shifted silent beat. Children hushed, dogs quieted. Thomas, glasses low on his nose, stepped forward from the board's table. He placed the keyring into the deputy's palm. We comply, he said softly. The lock turned. The click was small, but it carried like a hymn. Inside, the air smelled faintly of chlorine from the pool. Fluorescent lights flickered awake. The deputy walked to the corkboard near the entry. He pressed the injunction order flat and pinned it with a red tack. "Posted," he said. The room felt different. The paper changed it. Neighbors leaned close, phones flashing. Hannah whispered, "Finally, something solid." Miguel murmured, "Paper can unlock more than padlocks." Aunt May touched the seal gently the way she touched the cedar post. "This feels stronger than all their fines." The deputy taped a second copy to the glass door. For late readers, he explained. Then he called Evan, the records tech, with a county badge. Evan received a certified copy, held it with both hands like something delicate. "I'll scan and log tonight," he said. "Chain of custody begins now." Karen's lawyer cleared his throat. "We intend to appeal." "You have that right," I said. "And we have this." I tapped the seal. The hush in the clubhouse was heavier than any shout. Back outside, the BBQ smoke thickened. Kids rang a bell to announce sandwiches. A neighbor waved a plate at Aunt May. "First one's yours." She laughed, shaking her head. "Save it for someone hungry." Miguel grinned. "Justice makes me hungry." The deputy relocked the door, signed his log on the cruiser's hood. Thomas signed 2 glasses fogging in the warm air. The paper passed from hand to hand, each signature stacking weight. Karen stood apart staring at the posting through the door glass. Her arms folded, jaw set. The order hung there anyway, undeniable. At the pavilion, conversations rose. "Does this mean refunds?" one asked. Another said, "At least no more fines." The posting had shifted the ground. Not solved it, not yet, but steadied it. I looked at Aunt May. She was quiet, watching Evan slip the order into a mailer. Proof carried forward, proof preserved. The neighborhood smelled of hickory, sounded of children, and felt for the first time in weeks possible. The judge's words echoed in my memory, voided, enjoined. They weren't loud, but they lasted. And that was enough for now. They didn't start with speeches. They started with names. Eleanor Marsh. Thomas read, holding up a check so the potluck crowd could see the seal. Refund, $50, hose bib, cover. He passed it down the table. Brian Cooley, bird feeder, fine, $75. Hannah West, mailbox color, 100. Each slip of paper looked small and sounded large. The room breathed with it the way a hall does when the hymn is familiar. I stood beside Aunt May, the cedar taste of smoked ribs drifting from the warming trays. The bulletin board behind the serving line wore 3 columns of signatures, petition sheets curling at the corners like dried leaves. Beside them, the injunction order gleamed under tape, the red tack still bright. Keys clinked in a metal cup near the lectern, echo of yesterday's custody proof that locks can change without breaking a door. Karen didn't preside. She sat 2 rows back, hands folded, eyes on an invisible point. At the lectern stood Thomas with the steady posture of a man who knows paper can be a life raft. He set another check on the stack, looked up at us, and cleared his throat. "On behalf of the board," he said, "we apologize." The word moved through the room like warm air. "We will audit what we find and why. We will undo what should not have been done. We'll coordinate with the county, and we'll follow the record." He met Aunt May's gaze and didn't look away. "Starting tonight." Miguel slipped in along the side wall like habit. He wore a clean denim jacket and the diner's coffee on his breath. He didn't wave. He simply stood, anchoring the scene the way he always did, a quiet metronome inside a noisy song. I felt steadier with him there, the way you do when a bridge you built gets inspected and someone nods without words. Thomas turned a page. Finally, Aunt May Carter, refund $100. The check was pale blue. It traveled down the line from board table to ushers to Hannah to Aunt May, who took it with both hands not for the money, but for the sentence it wrote. She didn't smile. She pressed her thumb to the seal and let out a slow breath I could almost count. No one clapped, not yet. The hush came first, the silent beat that always follows truth in public. Folding chairs squeaked, then stilled. A child somewhere set down a fork. The room held itself steady, waiting to see if gratitude would cheapen the gravity. It didn't. The pause honored the apology. The apology steadied the room. "Apology weighs more than fines," Miguel said softly, almost to the bulletin board. Hannah heard it and repeated it under her breath as if trying on a size that fit. Thomas lifted an envelope. "We'll continue printing tonight. If you don't hear your name, you'll get an email with a time to retrieve your check." He looked down the table to where the keys sat in the cup. "And until the audit completes, we are keeping the posted order and the county's map on the board." He set the envelope aside, then reached for the microphone again. "There's one more item." He glanced at me, a question shaped like a comma. I nodded once. "Mr. Carter has provided additional documentation relevant to the board's understanding of access and oversight." Miguel moved then 3 steps no theater and placed a flash drive on the lectern. The plastic looked modest in the gym lights. Thomas held it up between thumb and finger. "This contains a letter from a federal agency regarding the creek crossing and private access. We will submit it to council and the county for verification." A rustle moved the room, 1,000 small opinions shifting chairs by a quarter inch. Karen's head tilted. "That wasn't on the agenda," she said, voice even. "It's not a vote," Thomas replied. "It's an acknowledgement." He set the drive beside the keys. Keys for doors, drive for records. The echo felt deliberate. From the potluck tables, the smell of baked beans rose under the aluminum lids. A neighbor whispered, "What federal? Another. Is the creek federal?" I didn't answer either. Some questions deserve a paper reply. I rested my hand on Aunt May's chair and felt the calm travel up my arm like warm light. Thomas glanced at me again. "Mr. Carter, anything you care to say?" "Only this," I said, keeping my voice at kitchen table volume. "We're not chasing volume anymore. We're following documents. Law isn't loud, it's lasting. Tonight is a good start." The words didn't try to trend. They sat where they were set like cups on a saucer. A neighbor in a ball cap nodded and murmured "lasting," as if tasting it. Across the aisle, Karen's jaw moved once, then stilled. Miguel leaned to the mic not close enough to claim it. "The board's apology goes in the minutes," he said. "The refunds go in the ledger. Both matter." He stepped back again, a witness who knew where to stand. Thomas stacked the remaining checks, squared the corners. "If you're leaving early, please sign beside your name so the treasurer can reconcile." Pens clicked. Names curved into ink beside printed lines. Paper kept becoming more paper, each sheet a lane toward daylight. The applause came late and honest. It started in the back, traveled forward, and softened near the lectern like waves at the lip of shore. No whoops, no show. Just hands acknowledging weight properly set down. Aunt May didn't clap. She placed the check in an envelope and tucked it beside the original deed in her folder, the old paper and the new paper sharing a sleeve. Keys chimed as Thomas lifted the cup to clear space. Small bells in a room that didn't need more sound. I touched Miguel's sleeve. "Tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," he said. His eyes flicked to the flash drive and back. We read the letter. Thomas tapped the microphone. "We adjourn for tonight. Board members will remain for questions." Chairs scraped. Lids opened. Steam rose. At the bulletin board, someone added a 4th petition sheet, the corners straighter this time, as if even paper had learned to carry itself. I watched the flash drive on the lectern catching the fluorescent stripe and thought of the letter inside it, the federal seal sleeping like a lighthouse lamp before dawn. We didn't crowd the table. We didn't argue the edges. We stood with plates we didn't fill beside a board that had learned to read out loud. The checks lay like proof stacked in daylight. The apology hung in the air heavier than any bylaw recited wrong. Tomorrow, the envelope would open and the room would hear a new sentence read into the record. Tonight, the room kept the pause. The envelope waited on the courthouse counter, simple but heavy. Inside were 2 items, the certified order and a small ring of Clubhouse keys labeled with neat tags. I signed the log and the clerk slid it across. The metal weight in my hand made the morning brighter than the bells outside. Across the square, church bells rang 4 o'clock. I walked to Aunt May's truck. "They're ours now," I said, "not Trophy's tools." She brushed the flap, then folded her hands. Calm, not triumph. We stopped at her porch first. The creek below whispered against stone. I rested my hand on the cedar mailbox and the wood carried its patience into my palm. That silent beat steadied me. By dusk, the neighborhood gathered. Folding chairs spread across the lawn. Smoke from a BBQ grill drifted sweet, and casseroles waited on potluck tables. The bulletin board still bore the injunction under its red tack. A plaque sat veiled under canvas. Thomas stood at the mic with the federal letter. From the Department of Transportation, re Ironwood Creek. His voice stayed plain. The letter confirmed the crossing private, the mailbox compliant, the HOA's claim unfounded. Each sentence felt carved, not spoken. Karen stood among neighbors, eyes lowered. Thomas folded the paper. "Mr. Carter," I cleared my throat. "Calm is not surrender. We followed records, not volume. That's enough." Heads nodded as if the phrase carried weight they already knew. Miguel stepped forward, set the keys in a shallow dish, and squared the order beside them. Prop R3 returned whole paper and metal paired again. Hannah lifted the canvas, revealing the bronze plaque. Ironwood Community Boundaries Honored Mailbox Compliant. Creek Crossing. Private. Posted by vote of the board. Hands came together slow, then steady. The mini cliff was the reveal itself, applause chasing after. Thomas handed me a screwdriver. Together with Miguel, I mounted the plaque. The last turn seated the screws. The plate kissed wood with a final click. Aunt May stepped forward holding her refund check. "I'm not cashing it," she said. "It stays framed with the deed." She smiled lightly. Laughter followed, gentle and honest. Karen lifted a hand. "We got carried away with power," she admitted. Her voice faltered. "I'm sorry." The room didn't jeer. The words stayed enough by themselves. Thomas asked, "Any objection to leaving the letter posted for 30 days?" Heads shook. "So ordered," he said, and for once the phrase drew soft laughter. The church bells tolled again, faint over the lawn. Children played with paper flags. Neighbors lined up for BBQ casseroles steaming. Evan slid the letter into a sleeve for scanning. Hannah pressed a card into my palm, lasting record. I looked at the dish of keys, pool, storage, clubhouse. Tools, not weapons. Passing them around would be just administration now. As the sun dropped, the plaque caught its last light. Aunt May touched my arm. "Let's go home." Back on her porch, the creek kept whispering. The mailbox stood quiet, unbent. I laid the envelope down, then lifted it again, habit, not fear. Some endings call for a shout. This one called for breath. I gave it, then said the line out loud to the water. Some lines don't fade. They hold. The plaque shone softly in the last light while the keys rested on the table heavier for what they now meant. The order had been read, the letter posted, and the applause faded into a silence that carried more weight than sound. We weren't celebrating a fine erased. We were mending trust, turning paper into healing. What began as a mailbox became proof that neighbors could redraw lines together with patience instead of pride. Justice doesn't need volume, it needs memory.